John, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme.
Thanks for having me.
What was the argument that the government should pay?
In this particular case, it was about people, older people who were looking after their disabled adult children in circumstances where if they weren't looking after them, the government would have no choice but to pay an agency such as IHC or Spectrum Care or some of the other major disability support providers to look after these disabled people. And the claim was that it was a breach of human rights, and the tribunal agreed with that. Because they were excluded from payment solely because they were members of the same family.
The government, there's a cabinet paper that the government had which said there's an implicit social contract in which there is an underlying, though not formally articulated, principle that people should not receive payment from the state to provide care for family members to whom they owe a familial duty.
I think that's a briefing from the Ministry of Health to the Minister or to Government, and I don't think that that is a position which has ever been formally adopted by Cabinet. One of the major problems we have with what is happening with the appeal and with the past policy is that the rules and the decisions have been made up by the policy analysts in the Ministry of Health and have not been grounded in either legislation or in Cabinet decisions. And that's a significant problem because they don't have a sound basis for that argument. We believe they don't. And if there is this social contract, they have certainly never discussed it in detail with the families. Whenever the issue has come up, families have given them quite a different message. And so we have, in some cases, relatively mid-level policy analysts whose main intention or mission is to reduce expenditure, making up the rules as they go along, and we think that's completely unacceptable.
Because I'm looking at it as coming to it fairly new as I have. What strikes me is that there's a level of inconsistency in what the government is saying, in that it does pay some carers, but not family carers. It's saying that it's going to cost them too much to do, and yet if the family carers pulled out, it would cost them a fortune to bring in people like IHC. And then last year we had John Key describing family carers as unsung heroes, but unsung heroes who are being told, thank you very much, but we'd like you to continue being unsung, thank you very much. So there's a real inconsistency.
I think very serious inconsistencies, and it's a historic issue which has grown up over time, but it's time to fix it rather than just say, well, this is a big problem for us. The previous government developed a carers strategies working with the Carers Alliance, and that set out a number of principles how government and government agencies would recognise, value and support the work that family carers do, looking after their sick, their frail and their disabled family members. One of the issues obviously was about how they are financially supported. The current government endorsed that policy or that carer strategy when they came in, and there were signals on a number of occasions that they were waiting for this decision from the tribunal in order to get some clear steer about how things should be dealt with in the future, and for them to almost knee-jerk reaction appeal and say that they don't want to do this because they believe they can't afford it is very, very disappointing for carers.
Let's talk a bit about the carers themselves, because we've been talking up till now about government and vast sums of money, but on a personal level, it's actually, the guys who took the appeal to the tribunal in the first place, they have a pretty tough life.
The particular cases, the carers themselves now will be becoming elderly. They will be looking after adult children who may be in their 30s, 40s or older, who have significant intellectual or physical disabilities, a lot of health problems, possibly seizures and various other things that need to be very carefully managed. In some cases, the Ministry of Health and the care agencies have asked the families to take the primary care for their disabled adult children because they felt that the care agencies were unable to provide adequate support. And in those circumstances, we believe it's just outrageous that the government would say we will exclude these people from any payment for doing what other people would be paid for and which we as government would have a duty to pay, solely because they happen to be related.
It's on the carers themselves. There must be a fair bit of wear and tear.
I think there is. I mean, speaking personally as a carer and with disabled adult children who actually live in a care situation and spend perhaps 1/5 of their time at home with Judith and I, it can be quite a significant burden. I know many who find it very, very difficult, and it is something which is ongoing, something which often seems endless. And I think even in situations where the family member is in a care situation, there is a lot of ongoing commitment to look after their interests and their welfare. You don't stop being the parent when the disabled adult child leaves home.
So the Carers Alliance obviously is unfortunately now stuck with having to face an appeal. What can you do and what can people do to help?
Well, I think our immediate strategy is to try and persuade the government that they should withdraw the appeal. It will not mean a huge and unbearable burden on the Treasury. It will mean that some people will be paid for the work that they're currently doing, but it will not mean that everyone who has a care situation in their home can expect to be paid. There obviously will be thresholds below which we will all have our personal and family responsibility to each other. If I stub my toe or get an ingrown toenail, or if I have a few weeks of recovery after a minor surgery, the government is not going to be sending in care workers to do our housekeeping and shopping and so on. There are times, though, for some people where they will do that and where they should do that, but it is about establishing what's the proper threshold, what is the point at which the care responsibilities, in some cases the burden of care, gets to such a level that the government really has a duty to step in and to not distinguish some people who they will pay or not pay simply because they are related. And that's the crux of the Human Rights Tribunal decision. It said that the government cannot justify this because for a government to be exempted from the human rights requirements, it has to be able to demonstrate that its policy is justified as a fair and reasonable approach that you would do in a democratic society in determining how you spend your money and so on. So the ministry and the government lost hands down on this issue. We hope that they will be big enough and brave enough to eventually recognise that and withdraw the appeal.
We'll follow it with interest. John, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
Great.